have the cloak pretty well sewn. There's only a couple of things left to do to it. I just quickly did a finishing on the inside seam of the border, which gives it nice weight, and because this is going to be visible quite a bit of the time, I didn't want raw edges on the inside. And up along inside the collar here I did similar. So beyond that, it's a fairly simple, straightforward cape modified to have a larger hood. The modification for that is pretty well the same process for all the other modifications. But what I need to do now is the distressing, the tattering that's in the design. So I have a line that I drew, you can see the diagonal line there, along which I want to maintain the tattering. And I've drawn in roughly what I want to do all the way along, following the line all the way down. And so I'll come over it with a pair of scissors and then a wire brush, and I'll show that process as I do it. Alright, we have the piece fully assembled and the detailing all finished on it, so let's go over some of the choices that were made. Primarily, choosing a heavier fabric like this, which is knit not woven, means that we didn't need to do any finishing on the exposed seams on the inside, and also gave a lot more flexibility in terms of how we wanted to do the distressing. As you saw, I used a wire brush to go over all these edges to help fray them and make them look more natural, because we don't want them to look like they were just done with a scissor, which clearly they were done so, but we want to sort of remove that illusion, or rather create the illusion that that's not what happened. So part of what I did there was to make sure that there's some layering, and especially areas that are more visible up here. The front and back pieces are finished a bit differently. Lots of techniques like stretching them, making small cuts in the sides so that it adds additional fraying, like here. Just adds a lot visually to it so that it looks more natural, and especially from a distance, it's important to make sure that it doesn't have a regular pattern. Yes, big, small, for the most part, but there is variety in there to help break it up so that it's not a really predictable pattern. The last thing you want is to just have like the bottom of a Peter Pan cloak, which is just a bunch of jags, because that looks really, really forced. So that's this section here, and that continues all the way down the hem and all the way down almost to the center on the back of the piece. And then up at the top, we wanted a much more finished look to it. So this is the outside where we have the flat black, and then the same cream fabric that was used on the tabards. And this is just a double over piece. I sewed this detail line afterwards because we wanted a bit more structure, but it's easier to sew something like that after getting the inside. At least for me it is. That's personal choice. And then what I did was I had the exposed seam. So this is sewn to that. It's folded over. You can kind of see how the construction works in here. Well, you used to be able to anyways. It's all distressed now. Long story short, this is sewn to here, and then this is put onto the cream and black piece, and then just inside of that folded over twice so that we get a nice finished detailed edge. This adds a lot more weight to the piece, which helps with the draping, and also makes it look very finished. So even if the front is exposed and you can see the inside, you're not going to see an unfinished seam. The only unfinished seams that I left were the insides of the shoulders down the sides, and then the inside of the hood center. So at this stage, the only parts missing are to purchase a clasp so that these meet. And here's another thing that I chose to do. This border goes all the way down, all the way around the hem. I made sure that these seams line up with the seams where the hood attaches so that they look more natural. So if we put the clasp here, the seams all line up and it looks like where you'd expect a seam to be. And then the other seams landed way down on the bottom hem where there was a seam, and that seam just continues. For the lining piece, I was less concerned because it's dark and it's going to be primarily hidden. This isn't facing outwards, this is the outward side. I just put those seams, hid them best that I could, obviously not trying to make them look messy, but just let them fall wherever they would. It's a less critical piece. Something to consider if you're using a woven instead of a knit fabric is it will be much easier to get fraying and much more distressing, but you'll want to sew around every single little hole once you have it where you want it to stop the fraying. Otherwise, the whole piece could come undone. And of course, test the fabric before doing the distressing. I took pieces of all three fabrics that I used. I used all the techniques on those scrap pieces to see how they would behave before proceeding to this stage. So I knew I'd need to double back the ends of my seams, but I knew I didn't need to sew around, such as right here. One other thing that I decided to do was, this is the inside collar seam. I decided to just take a doubled over piece of fabric and sew that over it to give a lot of finishing. This does two things. It really helps make the piece look more finished because this is going to sit up on the person's shoulders and it will be visible from behind while the hood is hanging. And also it adds quite a bit more strength, so this piece will be a lot more rigid having this in here.